All right. So, today's video is disgusting. Judge compares gender affirming care to cigarettes and beer while upholding youth ban. Okay, this is going to be lovely. A county judge in Missouri has upheld the state's ban on gender affirming care for minors. In a 74-page ruling issued Monday, Wright County Circuit Court Judge Craig Carter wrote, "If we don't let a 16-year-old buy a six-pack of beer and a pack of smokes, or let an adult buy those items for them, should we allow the same kid-parent team to decide to change a teenager's sex forever?" Okay, sir, first off, nobody's doing that. When they're teenagers, they're socially transitioning. It is very rare. You'd have to have really bad gender dysphoria to change your sex forever. So that's number one. Number two, detransitioning is a thing. That does exist. So you are not transitioning forever if you decide that you made a mistake. And when you're socially transitioning, that's a hell of a lot easier than a medical transition. So, again, no. And nobody's changing their sex. Everybody is very clear on the concept that their biological sex is the one that they had the natural body parts for. Unless you're intersex. Then it gets tricky. But yeah, nobody's changing their sex. They're changing their gender. Now, will they potentially go through the necessary surgeries to look more like the gender they identify as? Absolutely. That is not something they're doing as teenagers. Again, none of this is true. All teenagers do is socially transition. They are not changing their sex even as adults. Trans people are painfully aware what their biological sex is. Nobody is disputing that. And it's not forever. If at any point they realize that they made a mistake, they can detransition. Now again, it's obviously easier when you haven't had surgeries. Even when you just have had hormones, it's possible, depending on how long you've been taking them, you could stop taking them and there might not be too many permanent results. I don't know how long it takes for certain things to change when you're on cross-sex hormones, so I'm not going to give a timeline here. Not a clue. I mean, for all I know, it could be different for different people. So, yeah, none of that is happening. None of that is true. The restrictions on gender-affirming care passed by state lawmakers in 2023 bar minors from using hormones and puberty blockers and from undergoing gender-affirming surgeries. They also block state funding for gender-affirming care for adults through Medicaid and for prisoners incarcerated by the state. Okay, so they're just making trans people's lives harder because, again, I don't think that a lot of children are on hormones. It's mostly social transition, unless, again, they're in a really bad way with the gender dysphoria. But they're not allowed to be on puberty blockers either. Okay, there are people who go through puberty crazy early And if it weren't for puberty blockers, they would be going through puberty way too early, and they're not mentally capable of handling it. Like, say, they're 4 or 5 or something crazy like that. Now, that's been going on long before trans people were known to exist. Once puberty blockers started being prescribed to trans people, that's when people started to have a problem with puberty blockers. Before that, when they were used for other reasons, nobody batted an eye. All right. Now, also blocking state funding of gender-affirming care for adults through Medicaid and for prisoners incarcerated by state. Why? Seriously, why? Are you saying that poor people should be punished? Oh, wait. This is Missouri. They probably do think that. And why? I mean, prisoners are allowed health care. I realize that there are some people who think that any and all prisoners are monsters no matter what the crime, and that they should be treated as such. But those people are assholes, so we shouldn't listen to them. So, prisoners shouldn't get gender-affirming care. Now, I wonder if this affects cis people as well. Because in high school, once girls start getting their period, if they have a hard time with their periods, teenage girls have a hard time with their periods, they are prescribed birth control, because that can help them regulate their periods, make it easier to handle, provided you don't have anything worse like endometriosis or something. So that's a method. And you know what that is? Hormones. That's gender-affirming care. Now, unless this law is specifying trans people, you are telling me that cis girls have to suffer through painful periods simply because you decided that trans people shouldn't be allowed to exist. Cool. So there is that. And again, Medicaid, why? Just because you're poor doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to health care. And again, does this also apply to cis people? I hate that trans people should only have these rights because it could affect cis people, but there are just some people who cannot understand unless it affects them. So, and then, like I said, prisoners, well, they get health care. They are allowed health care. Whether you like it or not, they are allowed health care. Because in the Constitution, there is a clause against cruel and unusual punishment. And keeping health care away from people, yeah, that is definitely the definition. All right. And as for gender-affirming surgeries, again, those don't happen unless they're really, really bad. The gender dysphoria is just that bad. Otherwise, they wait for these things for adulthood. They wait with hormones, they wait with surgeries. So basically, the only people that you are affecting by this are those people who are in such dire need. And again, this also affects people who are going through crazy early puberty. And doctors realize that they are just not mentally ready for it, so they put them on puberty blockers. Now, are there side effects to puberty blockers? Sure. There's a side effect to literally everything. So that's not a reason. And just because you wouldn't want your child to get a certain health care doesn't mean you get to tell everybody's children what kind of health care they are allowed to have. That is why we have medical professionals. If it were the case that everybody gets to decide what medical procedure or what medicine their children are allowed to have, and they don't need experts, we wouldn't have doctors. Why have medical experts if you're going to do your own thing? Anyway, the ACLU of Missouri and Lambda Legal promised an appeal of the ruling. Carter acknowledged the ethical minefield the case presented, writing, "The medical profession stands in the middle of it, with scant evidence to lead it out." Huh? Are you saying that the medical profession doesn't know what the hell they're doing? I'm sorry. Where did you get your medical degree? Because unless you have one, you have nothing to say when it comes to medical professionals. Because just because you don't like what the science has to say, what the medical professionals are doing, unless you happen to be one, you really can't say either way. Just like all other medicine and medical procedures, you have a say in your medical health care. Just like everything else, you get a say in your health care. If you don't want a certain procedure or you don't want a certain medicine, that's up to you. You get to decide that. But you don't get to decide for others. And you sure as hell, as a judge with no medical experience, do not get to tell medical professionals whether there's enough evidence for whatever standards of care they are prescribing. The 9-day trial presented witnesses of varying credibility, with the state Solicitor General Joshua Devine dragging partisan politics into the proceedings. Isn't this whole thing about partisan politics? Some of his experts introduced research that has been retracted. Oh boy. If it's been retracted, why are you presenting it as fact? I mean, God. The plaintiffs argued. He maintained the scientific community had dismissed them because of cancel culture. So basically, this dipshit does not know how science works. Because studies don't get dismissed because of cancel culture. They get dismissed because they're shit studies. That's why we go through peer review. Because if you have a vigorously done study, if you have a well done study, even if it doesn't say something that people might want to hear, if it's a good study, it's going to get published. Like the NIH on its website mentions that going through puberty confers an advantage to trans women. So now a lot of organizations are banning trans women who've gone through male puberty. You know, that doesn't sound like it's pro-trans, but it was published. Why? Because it was a well-done study. Actually, I think this was I can't remember what the term is when they study a whole bunch of studies and have one big overview of a whole bunch of different studies. And if it wasn't well done, it would not have gotten published. That's the way peer review works. It has nothing to do with cancel culture. It has nothing to do with oh, well, we just don't like this conclusion, so we're going to bury it. Maybe once upon a time that sort of shit happened, and I'm afraid that during the Trump administration it'll happen again. But generally, that's not how it works. Carter's ruling relies in part on testimony from Jamie Reed, a whistleblower who worked at the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital. A sworn affidavit from Reed helped inspire the gender-affirming care ban. Reed maintained the hospital treated many patients with mental health problems without comprehensive psychological evaluations. At trial, there was disagreement over whether a licensed therapist's evaluation was enough to warrant gender-affirming care or if a psychologist or psychiatrist should be a requirement. The judge found Reed credible. Now, considering what the judge said about the cigarettes thing and beer, I question whether he understands what credibility means. I really do. And maybe he thinks he's credible because he agrees with him? I don't know. Because if it's true that they weren't going through psychological evaluations, that's a problem because that is a part of the transition process. You know, I've seen many comments about, oh, these people need to get help. I assume you mean psychiatric help. They get that. That's part of the transition process. You're just showing your utter ignorance in what it means to transition. Anyway. Oh, I'm sorry. Jamie is a her. Her testimony does not arise from any ideology or other bias, Carter wrote. In fact, she is married to a transgender individual. I'm sorry, is this the equivalent of I can't be racist because my best friend is black? Let me see. Brittany Mahomes has said racist things in the past. She's married to Patrick Mahomes, who's very much black. Are we going to say she couldn't possibly be racist? That she couldn't possibly have said racist things even though she has? Just because a lot of bigots are overall bigoted, but then there's that one individual, oh, you're one of the good ones or something. So that's not necessarily proof that this person is not a bigot. Reed is now the executive director of a small advocacy group called the LGBT Courage Coalition, which opposes gender-affirming care for minors. The day before she testified, her partner announced he was stopping testosterone treatments and detransitioning. Okay, now, this could be one of two things. People detransition for a few reasons. Number one, they realize they made a mistake. Number two, they just don't have the finances to continue on with the transition to the point that they want to or something. And a biggie is peer pressure. The people around them are convincing them that it's wrong to be trans, that there's something else going on, you're not really trans, and instead of fighting them because, it's pervasive around them, they just decide to detransition and keep the peace. They will sacrifice their own mental health just so people will stop shitting on them. So, now that I think about it, you're sacrificing one type of mental health issues for another. It's just a matter of which one is worse. So my question is that if this Jamie Reed's partner is detransitioning, does that mean she's a lesbian? I wonder if she'd be okay with being called that. I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying that she doesn't have a problem with it. I'm just curious. While Carter found Reed credible despite her advocacy, he didn't extend the same courtesies to some of the plaintiff's witnesses. He wrote he has concerns with deferring to the organizations relied on by plaintiffs, such as WPATH, which self-describes itself as an organization committed to advocacy. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health is a professional organization that sets standards for gender-affirming care. Okay, so you're willing to believe the advocacy of this woman who's advocating against gender-affirming care for minors, but you won't accept the advocacy for the opposite side. Yeah, this judge isn't biased at all. Carter's ruling ultimately focused on U.S. Supreme Court precedent that allows lawmakers broad discretion in areas fraught with medical and scientific uncertainty. By whose standards? Who decides that something is fraught with medical and scientific uncertainty? A bunch of lawyers? I would think that it would be the medical professionals. But considering you're ignoring the medical professionals you don't like, again, what uncertainty are you talking about? He judged there is an almost total lack of consensus to the medical ethics of adolescent gender dysphoria treatment, thereby agreeing the state legislature has the authority to ban the care. Okay. There is very little that has 100% agreement. There's always going to be one or two people who are complete quacks. I mean, I just don't see what is your standard for a lack of consensus? Because scientists don't agree that there's a lack of consensus. If they did, then every credible medical association wouldn't be advocating for gender-affirming care. So my problem is that now, if this law was against snake oil salesmen, I would be fine with that. But snake oil salesmen don't have a problem, running amok in society. But treatment that has been shown to be effective and necessary is somehow considered bad because you decided that you know what a consensus is, even though you are literally only allowing the side you want to hear talk? No, that's not how this works. Not how this works at all. So anyway, that is all I have for this article. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.